I will stutter. Be prepared. What up, lions and lionesses? Paw Pack back, and today we will be continuing the series of how to and how not to write. If you want to see the first installment of this series, I suggest clicking the card above or the video/playlist at the end of the video. Now, as I said in the first video, these are just my personal tips and what I like to see in an antagonist. If you want better tips, I suggest doing research like I have done. Anyway, let's get started. First things first. What's an antagonist? An antagonist is a villainous or villain-like character in a story. Here are some questions you should ask yourself when getting started on creating the character. What is my antagonist's backstory? What are my antagonist's motives? Why is my antagonist the way they are? How can I make my antagonist realistic and believable? How can I make the audience sympathize with them? Well, here I will be answering those questions. First, when making an antagonist's backstory, you need to make it believable and not super tragic. Tragic backstories sometimes work, but other times it seems forced or not tragic enough. When making a tragic backstory, a character doesn't necessarily need to die. Sometimes a character going missing or leaving is enough. Also, a character's backstory needs to be believable and not make the antagonist sound like a big baby, aka Infinet once again. When making the motives should line up with the backstory. The backstory makes the antagonist the way they are. Take Infinet for an example. His backstory makes no sense with his current motives in Sonic Forces. In his backstory, he had beef with Shadow and went after Sonic instead. What sense does that make? Plus, he was just a big baby when Shadow called him weak. Now, you don't want your villain to be like Infinet, right? Then make the motives make sense with the backstory. When explaining why the antagonist is the way they are, it all comes back to the backstory. How did the antagonist become mean or evil? The backstory explains that. If the antagonist was raised up or brought up in a bad environment, that makes sense to why they are mean or evil. If they are raised or brought up in a good environment, it usually doesn't make sense, or sometimes does in rare cases. When making your antagonist realistic and believable, they must have human rights and wants and desires. If that is absent in your writing, then the antagonist's character might seem forced or ingenuine. That also applies to having the audience sympathize with them. If the audience can't relate to them, the antagonist will not be sympathized with. Overall, it all circles back to the backstory. So the backstory must be written correctly, or the antagonist will feel rushed or all over the place. Anyway, that's all for today. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It helps so much, and I thank you for those who subbed. Only 8 away from 50. Wow. Later, lions and lionesses, keep roaring to success.